Welcome, UCF fans, to the News Journal's beginning of a 12-part preview each of the Knights' opponents for the 2024 football season. My name's Chris Boyle. I cover the Knights for the Daytona Beach News Journal, and we are joined today by Roger Brown from the New Hampshire Union-Leader to talk a little UNH Wildcat football. Roger, how are you?
I'm excellent, Chris. Thank you for having me. Football right around the corner. Looking forward to it.
Well, we're glad to have you. Not a lot of outlets covering New Hampshire these days, so it's good to find you. Tell us a little bit about your background covering the program and obviously what UNH has done at the FCS level.
Yeah, I worked for a couple of different New Hampshire newspapers, so I covered them off and on probably for like 20 plus years. I was on the UNH hockey beat up here for the longest time. Was the number one sport here, and then shifted over to football when they started to become more of a force at the national level among FCS teams, anyways. And they have a rich history. A lot of big names. And Ryan Day played here. Chip Kelly was here as a coach. I think when Chip was here, that's probably when they kind of formed their identity. They have every trick play, and they weren't afraid to use them back then. They were, a lot of creativity on their offense. And, when Sean McDonald took over, they took a couple of steps forward. They were always a good program in their conference. But then they started to win, nationally. I think they had, they beat a FBS opponent for 5 straight years, and that kind of put them on the radar. So they kind of had this reputation as a giant slayer, and they were, always fun to watch. Like I said, their craziness on offense, trick plays, and whatnot. So that's pretty much it. It's been a strong program. The last 20 years, they had a coaching change here a few years ago, and Rick Santos, probably one of the best, or without a doubt, one of the best players in the program's history, is running the show now, and doing a good job so far.
Obviously, this is not an opponent to be taken lightly, even though this is what you would consider a bye game from UCF's perspective. Tell us, going into this year, 2 years ago, they made the FCS playoffs. Last year, they were one of the higher scoring teams in the division, the subdivision. So is this going to be a team that you think come this fall has a chance to get back to the postseason?
I think they do have a chance to get back. Certainly I wouldn't say the expectations are nearly as high this year as they were a year ago. But traditionally, this is one of those programs that when you expect them to be really good, they maybe have an off year, and some of their best years have been when they've caught people by surprise, so to speak. And when I say people, I mean the fan base. Tough school to predict. I would say there's a lot of questions this year. Every team has them, of course. They probably have more than most because of their departures, both player-wise and on their staff. So, I certainly wouldn't write them off, but there's a lot of questions to be answered. They got a lot of key pieces that we just haven't seen play yet, quarterback being one of them, so we're going to have to learn a little bit about this team before you can really pass judgment, I think.
To that point, they did lose their starting quarterback, an FCS All-American last year, in Max Brosmer, to the transfer portal. He's now at Minnesota. Running back Dylan Lobby, who was very impressive at the Senior Bowl, was drafted by the Las Vegas Raiders. So what is the offensive identity of this team going to be? Obviously, I know the scheme will probably be the same, but what can we expect from New Hampshire from a talent standpoint across the board?
Yeah, what you're going to see, they were under center quite a bit. And when I say quite a bit, I don't mean like they were never in the shotgun or anything like that. But in the world of football, they took a lot of snaps under center. And I think that was primarily to Lobby was such a weapon, that allowed him to use him in play action pass game. So I really don't know if we're going to continue to see that moving forward. or if they're going to be strictly shotgun. They've got a couple of running backs who, they're older kids. They've got some playing time. They're not, raw by any stretch. Big shoes to fill, obviously, with Lobby. Veteran offensive line should be good there. Decent wide receiver core. They use the tight end a lot when they're at their best, anyways. And really, quarterback is the biggest question. I think they have. You can't expect to have another Dylan Lobby, but I do think they have capable running backs. Probably use two of them, I'm guessing, regularly. Quarterback, we've only seen Seth Morgan, in the spring game. He's probably going to be the guy. The rest of their guys are younger, maybe not quite ready yet. From what I saw, Morgan doesn't look like he has the strongest arms, but he's supposed to be a very, very accurate quarterback. Started his career at the FCS level and then transferred to close to home. I think he's from Pittsburgh, so he played for Shepherd strong Division II program, and they were looking for a veteran quarterback when Max left. So he's going to have a good year for them to have success for sure, like any program with quarterbacks.
Sure, and that was going to lead me into my next question. I mean, the only two quarterbacks that they have on the roster from a year ago combined to throw 7 passes. So is it going to be Seth Morgan is that the expectation? Is he's going to walk right in from D2 Shepherd, a school that just produced an NFL long ago and Tyson Agent, that he's going to be the guy to go under center for New Hampshire this year?
Yeah, I think he'll be the guy. I think that's a safe assumption. Rick Santos, he stopped short of naming him as the starter after their spring game. But he said it's very, they're very close to, him being the guy. They have a kid from Georgia, Barry Kleinpeter, who, they're very high on. And it was interesting because in that spring game, they used him at running back and some other positions. He's a very athletic kid, and they've said multiple times that they just have to get him on the field if he's not playing quarterback. So not sure what we're going to see with him. He's kind of an X factor. But, maybe they'll use him a little bit at receiver, maybe a little bit at running back. And, their other guy, Deza is probably not ready, but, a year from now, maybe it's his turn.
You mentioned that the offensive line is going to be a strength. Another strength on paper, at least, would be their receiving core. Their top 3 wide receivers from a year ago, Logan Tomlinson, Joey Corcoran, and Caleb Burke, are all expected to be back. Give us a sense who guys are and what what challenges they pose for an opposing secondary.
Yeah, Tomlinson he's a former quarterback who transferred in from a Division III program before last season and was very productive. Brings a lot of leadership. He's one of their captains this year. I don't want to label him a possession receiver, but he finds a way to get open. He's not the burner. That would be Corcoran. He's probably they have a big play threat. It'll be him. Had some off-field things going on last year, so didn't quite have the season. They didn't build on his prior season as much as many people thought, but I think everything straightened out, and he's a guy that really could have a breakout year for them, big numbers, and somebody to watch for sure. If they're going to have success in the passing game, he'll have to be a big part of it. And then they've got the veterans. Did you mention Meade or Burke? They got couple other guys. Yeah, a couple other guys that will fill in, and usually they spread the ball around quite a bit. It's just what their offense is, regardless of who's the quarterback. And I think I mentioned earlier, tight end is usually a big part of their game. And their tight ends block, of course, like everywhere else. They usually have athletic tight ends that can stretch the field a little bit, so they go downfield with them. And I would say, if there's a kid on their roster that's not all that well known right now, who might have a big year, it's probably Colby Ramshaw, who's would be my guess would start at tight end this year. So he's another one to look for in that opener. He's, had a little bit of seasoning, hasn't got a lot of playing time, but he's actually a New Hampshire kid. And I would expect him to have good numbers this year.
So you have a New Hampshire kid. You also have quite a number of Florida kids on the New Hampshire roster. I count almost a dozen of them, a little short of a dozen. Of that group, kind of take us through, what sort of impact you think a few of those guys can make. In particular, they have an all-conference defensive lineman from right down the road in Kissimmee.
Yeah, Dylan Ruiz, he's of all the Florida guys, he's probably the one that their best player from that state. And they do have two excellent defensive ends. They have Dylan and Josiah Silver. Both had huge years 2 seasons ago and took a step back last year. I don't know so much that their play regressed. It was just defense was a problem last year. They just couldn't cover people and didn't have time to get to the quarterback, I think was part of it. But certainly if those two guys, Dylan in particular, can return to form along with the rest of the defensive line could be a strength this year for them. But they certainly need certainly expecting a lot from him and need him to contribute quite a bit. We were talking a little bit of some of the other Florida guys I'm not as familiar with because they're younger guys who haven't got a lot of playing time yet, but they have been going down south more. They've got some Georgia kids, and they used to be pretty much a New York, Northeast up type of recruiting base with some Florida kids, but they're heading south lately, which probably is a wise move if they can get them.
Yeah, for fans in the Daytona market, there are a couple players from Volusia and Flagler counties, my stomping grounds for high school coverage. You got Sam Rizzo out of Port Orange, Spruce Creek, and then you also have Noah Cundiff, a wide receiver from Matanzas High School up in Palm Coast. Roger, I know this is a game that won't define New Hampshire season by any stretch of the imagination, but we looked for each of our writers to give a prediction of the game ahead. So what do you expect of them when they go down to Orlando?
Well, I'm not going to predict a win, but they certainly could throw a scare into them. That's just what they've done in the past. They've beaten some big name programs when they weren't expected to, and this doesn't look like their strongest team. But again, like I said in the past or earlier, usually these are the types of teams that overachieve for them. So, I would say, maybe a game that's close into the third quarter, and then maybe it gets away from New Hampshire at that point. But certainly a competitive game for, maybe into the early portion of the second half.
Yeah, I think last year they took Central Michigan to overtime, if I'm not mistaken. One of the games that they were right into at the very end. Another team from the FBS. Now, granted, it's a team out of the MAC as opposed to a Power 4 team, but still, I mean, that says something that UCF shouldn't go into this sleepwalking, even though it'll be a Thursday night. And last year they took care of business pretty easily against Villanova, another team out of the Colonial Athletic Association. But I agree. I think New Hampshire is a pretty proud program for that level. Roger, where can people find your work, and where can they find you on social media?
On X, I'm 603 Sports Media. As you mentioned, the New Hampshire Union-Leader, which is paper based in Manchester. And if they're just looking for football as a side hustle, I do the New Hampshire Football Report, which is nhfootballreport.com. If you want to learn a little bit more about UNH, we'll have stuff on there in the coming weeks, and previewing the game and whatnot.
And as for UCF coverage, you can find me at Chris Boyle DBNJ. We'll be here with writers of all 12 opponents over the course of the next few weeks. We're going to be running detailed previews on each team as well in print, and we'll get you plenty ready for UCF by the time August rolls around. Roger, thanks so much for your time today.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.